Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The people of Zimbabwe followed what has been happening in Venezuela very closely and with a great deal of interest, and rightly so too. The two countries have had similar events, much more so of the ill effects of being stuck with a ruthless, tyrannical dictatorship. But I think this cartoon depicts the subtle difference between the two nations. While many in Venezuela are celebrating that Maduro was booted out, their counterparts in Zimbabwe are up in arms that Maduro should not have been booted out. There is a world of difference. The level of mental appreciation of what is happening in the two countries are different. I would like to start this comparison, first of all, referring to an article that was written by somebody in Venezuela. Sorry, he is a Venezuelan, but he's now been living out of the country for a long time. And in this article, he is, or she is, talking about why the people of Venezuela are actually celebrating that Maduro was put it out. And I think it is an important comparison. In this article, the individual talks of, if you're American, you're curious why Trump's forced eviction of Maduro. Because some Americans, and rightly so, are saying what Trump did was unlawful. So why are the people in Venezuela themselves celebrating it? And he goes on to talk about some of the problems that Venezuela have faced. Under the Maduro Chavez dictatorship, the country has lost roughly 80% of its economy, he argues. And I think many Zimbabweans know exactly what the individual is talking about. Because Zimbabwe in 1980 and Zimbabwe now, they're two totally different countries. We had industries. Our towns and cities had thriving industries, making all manner of goods and products. But most of those industries have since closed down. If not completely, they've scaled down considerably. So that unemployment has soared to, in Zimbabwe, it has been 80% plus for the last 20 years. The individual is also talking about the hyperinflation. I think many of the people who were reading widely, they would have known how on many occasions Venezuela and Zimbabwe seems to be running a rat race of their own. Here is the individual is talking of how the prices did not only change year by year, but month by month, daily, and sometimes hourly. Zimbabweans will relate to that too. At the peak of our hyperinflation in 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was a world record 500 billion%. The prices were changing. You pick up something on the shop floors, by the time you take it to the counter, they will tell you the price has changed. That's how quickly things were changing. The individual is also talking about the problem with vote rigging, that elections in Venezuela were rigged. I think this is an issue that many Zimbabweans, again, would be familiar with. We all know what happened in Zimbabwe ever since the country set its independence in 1980. Zimbabwe has never held free, fair, and credible elections. That is the reality. We can talk of the 2008 elections. That was the nearest the country ever got to holding free, fair, and credible elections. And it was only because SADC had forced ZANU-PF to implement significant reforms to make those elections the nearest we ever got to free, fair, and credible elections. But when the regime realized they were losing the elections, they stepped in. Here is a description from Dr. Ibo Mandaza of the events of 2008.
I also know that Mugabe conceded defeat on 2008. He found Mbeki and Obasanjo to concede defeat. I hope that Thabo Mbeki and Obasanjo will one day make that public. But one of them, I won't say which one, told me that Mugabe phoned them that Saturday night and said, look, I lost the election and I concede defeat. And I know that Mugabe stuck to his guns. I was prepared to go. His wife was since bags packed to go somewhere on the following day when Mnangagwa and Chiwenga approached him and said, you stay where you are. And then they contrived the runoff, sadly with the help of South Africa. And runoff took place, very violent. 360 people were killed. The South African, I came here as part of a delegation to Cape Town to see members of the ANC. I don't want to mention names, they're my friends. I saw them, and through them, a cabinet committee subcommittee of South African cabinet was set up on the Zimbabwe issue. It was on the basis of that cabinet committee that South Africa did not recognize the runoff. And indeed, it was the basis of that committee that Thabo sent the generals to South Africa, to Zimbabwe. I met them, and I was one of the few to have read the report, because I was flying to Joburg in the company of General Romano, who was a friend. He passed away, no? So, yeah. And I also took people who had lost their hands in the violence to the South African embassy in Harare. And Romano broke down in tears. How can a liberation movement treat these people like that? He was a broken man. So there's no doubt at all here in South Africa as to the brutality of the regime in Harare. So it amazes me, it angers me, in fact, when I hear the nonsense coming out of people like Mbalula's mouth. They know it. And the report has never been published, the general's report, to this day. That tells you.
The tragedy is that in Zimbabwe, the two individuals who orchestrated the 2008 electoral coup, Emerson Mnangagwa and Chiwenga, were never sent to prison. They should have gone to prison straight away for what they did. They did not. Mugabe was the beneficiary of that electoral coup, and they turned on him in 2017 when they staged the military coup. And the two thugs are in power today. One is the president, the other one is the vice president. That is how bad our dictatorship has been in Zimbabwe. But it will be amiss to fail to say that the 2008 elections did produce one positive thing. SADC refused to recognize Mugabe and his regime as the legitimate government, forcing him to accept the GNU. The GNU was the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms. I don't know whether Venezuela had a similar opportunity, but as far as I know, they did not. And this is where the comparison ends. Venezuela's opposition have been consistently committed to getting the country back on a democratic path. We can't say the same thing with our opposition in Zimbabwe. That is a subtle but important difference. The other thing we can say also is that the people of Venezuela have remained committed to democracy. We cannot say the same thing about our own people. The one lot, the ZANU-PF diehards, they have remained committed to supporting ZANU-PF. And hence the reason why we have got the ZANU-PF youths demanding or enraged that Maduro was booted out. But we also have got to talk of the opposition supporters. Zimbabwe's opposition supporters are themselves responsible for keeping ZANU-PF in power, in the sense that they have continued to participate in flawed elections, even when the opposition leaders themselves have said and admitted that the election process was flawed. And they have admitted they've been participating in these flawed elections out of greed. There is no excuse whatsoever why the Zimbabwe electorate have failed to see the opposition leaders for who they really are: corrupt, incompetent, liars, and conmen. But that is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. We cannot keep on pretending that the opposition in Zimbabwe is still fighting in the people's corner. They are not. They have long ago stopped fighting in the people's corner. Why are we not accepting that reality? It beggars belief. We have millions who were going to participate in the 2023 elections. And even now, with the benefit of hindsight, many of them still refuse to accept that Chamisa lied to them.
Ende patakasangana na Trump akatibvunza nawe akomana mari yamuri kuda kuti nyika ifambe imari.
Serious questions were raised about your behaviour in Washington, D.C. You did see some senior people on Capitol Hill, some Congress people, but you also claimed that you'd seen Donald Trump. You claimed you had a conversation with him in which you said he asked you how much you needed to move the country forward. You told him $15 billion, and he said to you that he would provide the money if you won the election. That was not true, was it?
Sangana na Trump akatibvunza nawe akomana.
It was not true that you'd seen Donald Trump and that Donald Trump indicated to you that he would provide, if you won the election,
but
$15 billion.
All those statements were said by other people, not what I said.
Well, no, because there is a video which shows you at a rally in January back home in Zimbabwe saying that Donald Trump had pretty much promised you $15 billion. To be clear, because some people in Zimbabwe are still confused, you're now telling me you did not meet Donald Trump.
We did not.
This is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. Chamisa is a liar and a conman. Why is it that we have got millions of our own people out there who still stubbornly refuse to accept that political reality? We have got to face the reality that in Zimbabwe, the ZANU-PF dictatorship would have been dismantled years ago, at the very latest during the GNU, if the opposition had not sold out. Pretending that the opposition have done nothing wrong is at the heart of why we have been stuck with the dictatorship these last 15 years. Right now, Nelson Chamisa and these cronies are gearing to participate in 2028 elections on the basis of yet another lie that they would win rigged elections. And if millions participate in those flawed elections, they will give the dictatorship legitimacy. That is the reality. We cannot run away from the fact that we, the people of Zimbabwe, are partly to blame for why Zimbabwe is a failed state, why we are stuck with this ZANU-PF dictatorship. So I go back to the original quotation or statement I gave at the beginning. There are parallels between the dictatorship in Venezuela and that in Zimbabwe. Between Maduro and Mnangagwa. However, there are no parallels between Zimbabwe's opposition and the povo and Venezuela's opposition and their populace. And it is that subtle difference that gives Venezuela hope, particularly now that Maduro is out. Yes, the circumstances under which he was removed may not have been the ideal, but if they remain committed, there is hope for that country to end the case of rigged elections and bad governance. Whereas in Zimbabwe, even if Mnangagwa was removed, with the opposition we have, with the povo we have, I think it will be a question of swapping one dictator for another, as we did in 2017. I want to re-emphasize this point. For the last 15 years, Zimbabwe's corrupt, incompetent opposition and the naive and gullible millions of opposition supporters have played their part in keeping ZANU-PF in power. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.